So, Randy, you own a schooner. You've been in schooners a long time. What got you interested in the Starling Burgess?
Um, Kind of a funny and embarrassing story. I was in a classic yacht regatta back in the '80s in my schooner Sarah Abbott in Newport, Rhode Island, and I was feeling pretty good about the race, and we were holding our own against some pretty tough competition, like Brilliant, and then this schooner blows by me. I guess maybe she didn't get a good start, but she blows by me, and it's Nina. And I said to the guy who was my mate, was also my relief captain on the schooner. I'm going like, God, what is that boat? And he goes like, that's Starling Burgess, Nina. And I'm going like, it's awesome. And he said, you have no idea. He said, Nat Harrishoff was a great engineer, and John Alden was an artist, but Starling Burgess was a poet. And you know what? Starling Burgess wrote poetry, but that was my introduction. After the race, I go up, they were handing out the trophies. Of course, we didn't get one, but Nina did, right? And I talked to Nina's owner and skipper at that time, Hans Van Ness, and I'm going like, you have an awesome boat. And he said, he goes, I've been sailing boats for like 70 years, and nothing has been as exhilarating as sailing Nina. And I'm going like, I can see why. So that got me hooked on learning about Burgess schooners.
So, Starling Burgess started designing fairly young. His father was a designer.
Yeah, Edward Burgess, as I think I said earlier, he was well known for designing America's Cup boats in the late 19th century, but he also designed the Fredonia model fishing schooners. And young Starling, after dropping out of Harvard, goes, well, I can design workboats too. So he's 25, 26 years old, and he doesn't go for fishing schooners. He's going for the big fish, which at that time was a coasting schooner. So he designs a 5-masted coasting schooner called the Jane Palmer. And she's like 304, 306 feet long. But the great early 20th century yacht designer, B.B. Crowninshield, was a race boat designer. He looks at Jane Palmer and he goes, like, that's not an ordinary coasting schooner. He goes, our lines are way too fine and she's too fast. So even then, as this college dropout, Starling Burgess is designing swift and sort of breakthrough boats, and of course with schooner rigs. Now he follows that up a year later with another breakthrough boat, which is the Elizabeth Silsby, and she's about 120 feet, 100-ton fishing schooner, but she has an auxiliary engine, and she's the first auxiliary fishing schooner to come out of New England. And of course, she becomes a highline boat because she can go in the other guy. I mean, a lot of times
columns, she can
motor right through the columns. Now, a lot of times, of course, going to the Grand Banks out of Gloucester, it's a reach out and a reach back. But you can also get becalmed out there 75, 100 miles out and just sit. And first boat home gets the price, right?
That's
and so
yeah.
once again, there's Starling Burgess going like, I think I had a better idea.
Now, in the autobiography by Llewellyn Howland, Starling Burgess gets distracted for a while and kind of wings off and starts designing airplanes.
Right. In Howland's book, No Ordinary Being, he certainly makes that case. He goes like, yeah, like after these sort of breakthrough boats that Burgess designs in the first decade of the 20th century, he goes like, I'm pretty fascinated by airplanes. And he starts designing airplanes, and he co-designs them with none other than Glenn Curtis. So through from about 1908 almost to 1920, Burgess not dealing with boats. They're designing float planes. He and Glenn Curtis, and they're flying them in and out of Marblehead Harbor. So it's like, between the yachts. It was craziness. But by 1920, he's starting to think about boats again, and maybe because the big commissions starting to come his way. Now, his father's dead. He's the heir to the throne, and the biggest race in terms of public attention and celebrity at the time is the international fishing schooner races between New England, basically Gloucester, Massachusetts, and Canada. The Maritime Province of Nova Scotia, right? And so it's the 1920s. There's a lot of money, and so the syndicate comes to him in 1920. Like, you need to give us a boat that's going to beat the Canadians, but it has to at least look kind of like a fishing schooner. So he designs. So look at the name they picked for it too, Mayflower. So he designs this fishing schooner, or a schooner called Mayflower, that is allegedly
a working fishing schooner.
And to be eligible to race, the boat had to do one season on the Grand Banks. So they sent it out there and it caught some fish and it came back. So the races are generally in the fall after the fishing season. And so Mayflower is ready to go to Halifax to race the Canadians, and the Canadians take one look and they're going like, that's not a fishing schooner.
Yes, it is. It smells like fish.
Oh, yeah, exactly. See, no kidding. Look, there are fish scales in the fish hole, right? And they're going like, fishing schooners have this long counter with an elliptical transom, and that thing is like chopped off at the back end, right? They go like,
you're breaking the rules.
Yeah, they're going, exactly. You're breaking the rules. We're not going to allow it. So that was that, and so the Americans sent some boat up to Halifax, some real fishing schooner to Halifax, and she got whooped by the Canadians. Canadians were really happy, and the Americans were really unhappy. And there's a lot of money around. So another syndicate comes back and they're to Burgess, and they're going like, can you do like maybe even a better job here, just disguise it a little more?
Right.
So this is like 1922 maybe, and Burgess designs a schooner they call Puritan. And she's got finer lines and fuller bilges than Mayflower, and she has an overhanging counter with the elliptical transom, and they let her race. Americans felt really, really good about how she was going to do it in Halifax, because they trialed her against Mayflower, and she trounced Mayflower.
But she still looked like a fishing schooner.
But she still looked like a fishing schooner, and she actually fished really well. She made at least 2 fishing trips that summer to the Grand Banks and came back with an enormous amount. She was a highliner. She came back, right, more fish than any of the other boats in the fleet. And and she went out and got back faster too. So she actually made some money and was able to kind of pay some of the bills that her syndicate,
right?
Because the syndicate it put an awful lot of money to just put this thing together. So they were getting ready to send her to race against Bluenose. Now, I can't remember if that race was going to be in Halifax or in Gloucester, because they alternated back and forth. But her skipper and her syndicate, they're going like, we need to make some more money. They sent her on a 3rd fishing trip to the Grand Banks in early fall of 1923, I guess. And it's the North Atlantic in the fall, and the weather gets really squirrely. And they were running in fog the whole time, and the skipper overran his DR. It just underestimated how fast she was going, because he just wasn't used to fishing schooners going that fast. And so she overran her DR, and she ran up on Sable Island off Nova Scotia, and she broke up and she was lost. So she was never raced.
Wow.
Yeah, sad story. Right.
So after that disappointment, did they try again?
They did, because there was even more money. This is the Roaring 20s in America, right? I mean, so another syndicate forms, and they really want to beat the Blue Nose even more, because Blue Nose had trounced the only schooner that had a chance, American schooner that had a chance to race her, named Elsie. So they go to Burgess again, and they're going like, one more time, Starling. And he comes up with Columbia. And she, a lot of observers have said, including prominent naval architects, she has the finest bow profile of any fishing schooner. And if you look at the pictures of her, the original Columbia, and also these restorations or replicas of Columbia that have been built in the last 6 years, I'm sure you're going to say, I haven't seen much prettier. Anyway, so they built Columbia, and she went out, she fished, and she was a highliner for her summer, and then she went to Nova Scotia to race. She had a hard trip up, and she was damaged, but like nobody knew it. But in the first race out of Halifax, Blue Nose whipped her, and her skipper, who I think was Ben Pine, out of Gloucester, he scratched his head and said, "There's something wrong with this boat. She didn't sail like this before." They send a diver down. They find that she had tweaked her rudder. They fixed it. So then comes the second race. It's the long course. It's a 50-mile course out of Halifax, and they go in a building gale. And the two boats are dueling back and forth, and like nobody's taking sail down. And they're carrying 10 to 12,000 square feet of canvas, right, in a gale. And of course the crews are like no joke either. For example, the entire crew on Columbia was made up of fishing schooner captains from Gloucester. I mean, this is not like one deckhand.
They're seasoned.
Yeah, there's not one deckhand among them, okay? It's a 50-mile course in a gale and fog. And they keep trading places. In the end, Columbia wins. It's kind of disputed because one of the reasons she won is that the race committee nicked Blue Nose because she took one of the buoys on the wrong side. Like, I don't think anybody was really there to see, because it's a gale and the buoy was maybe 8 to 10 miles out.
Right.
But nevertheless, she won. So the Americans are feeling pretty good. They're going like, okay, Angus Walters, Blue Nose, let's go for this again. And Angus Walters goes like, no, Blue Nose is done racing. Because he knew, he had won the previous two schooner races, and now, okay, so he raced to a draw here. He wasn't going to take the chance of losing. Because, and this is why Blue Nose is so famous. And of course, she goes on to beat other American schooners in subsequent years. But, that's why she ends up on the dime for the Canadian, on the Canadian dime, because she's the icon of, the maritime history of Canada.
So he designed fast commercial vessels, but he was also designing yachts.
He was, and he was also designing one design boat. So right in that era, he was designing the R class and the Q class, one design boats for club racing. But of course, he always had bigger game in mind, and because of the popularity of the international fishing schooner races, yachtsmen with a lot of money in their pocket wanted schooners. Schooners were like the thing to have, right?
Yeah, that was the rig.
That was the rig. So a man named Lawrence, who was a prep school classmate of Burgess came to him in 1925, 1926. He said, I want an ocean racing schooner. I want something.
Nice commission.
Yeah. He said, I want something like Columbia or Puritan, but then I don't need 40 people to sail.
Right.
And
you don't have to take fishing.
yeah, and you know, right. I can take my wife and my girlfriends out, right? So Burgess is going like, yeah, I totally get what you want. So he basically takes the lines of Columbia and scales them down to this 88-foot racing schooner yacht called Advance. And once again, it's a breakthrough boat because the hull design is the one that's been perfected through the previous 3 fishing schooners, more or less.
Right.
But now he changes the rig, and it changes the whole game. So Advance becomes the first staysail schooner. And so basically her rig is like, she's like kind of like 2 sloops in tandem, right?
Right.
And it makes her more weatherly.
Right.
And he goes like, well, we don't have 40 people. We want people on a yacht. Like, we want a crew of 10 or 15 to be able to get these sails up and down. And so they go like, oh, yeah, so we're not going to have gaff rig here.
Right, because with the gaff 4, you need to drop the fisherman and put it up on the other side every time you tack.
Right.
So with the staysail schooner rig, you can just run the fisherman sheet through the staysail stay slot. And so you can tack it without dropping it.
Exactly. And, of course, he's going like, well, what's come along now also, real changes in spar design. And they're going like, we can make hollow wooden spars. Like all these fishing schooners, like they've got they're trees, right? And then they're going like, we can make a tall, hollow spar for the mainmast, and we can put, a triangular sail, Marconi rig on the main. And so suddenly you can get the sail up with like 8 guys instead of 18,
right,
or 28, right? So Advance has a Marconi main. She stays a rig, so she has a main staysail and 4 staysail and a jib, right? But it's like, but we lost all this sail area that we used to get out of the gaff rig foresail. So how do we fill in that empty triangle? And they're going like, well,
build a sail for it.
Right. But then they go like, well, the fisherman had fisherman staysail that filled some of that space, but it's mostly up top, right?
Right.
And it's a reaching sail.
Right.
And these guys are going like, we want this to be a weatherly sail. We want to really fill in that triangle. So what can we put in there? And they're going like, oh, well, it's got to be another trapezoidal sail, but it's going to be way taller. This can come down much lower, and that becomes the Advanced staysail. Right. So it's a modified fisherman.
So in the old days with the gaff 4, if you look at the pictures, they flew what was called a flat galley, and that was flown inside of the gaff 4. And then the Advance, because the material with the staysail schooner, they could fly it outside the staysail, which made it foil better. And it was a sail that tacked at the base of the 4, went all the way up the foremast, and then peaked at the top of the main and sheeted clear down to the end of the boat.
Right.
It was a massive sail.
And
the power you could get out of that sail in medium to light airs was just immense.
And it's a windward sail.
Right. You can carry it pretty far on the boat.
Right, almost the whole way as high as the boat would point, right?
Right.
And so, as you can imagine, Advance, like, out of the blocks in her first ocean races, she's killing the Aldens and the Crown and Shields and these other great, and the Harrishots, these other great big fancy racing schooners. And it only takes a year between like 1926 and 1927, where the second year that Advance is out, all the owners of the Aldens, the Harrishots, the Crown and Shields, they're done whining. They've gone back. They're spending tens of thousands of dollars to convert their schooners to staysail schooners.
Right.
And so suddenly, the last 5 years of the 1920s, Staysail schooners, just like boom, they burst onto the scene. But there was nothing. I mean, like, so Advance was a game changer. But was Starling Burgess done? No.
So after Advance, what were the next?
Well, Burgess is not just fooling the schooners, but that's where there have been a lot of big commissions for schooners. But the second tier of yacht racers, more inshore than ocean racers, they're interested in class racers, and pretty infatuated with the 10 and 12 meter designs, and most of which are being built, replicated in Europe. So Burgess is like, I can get into this picture too. So he starts designing 12 meters and 10 meters. 10 meters like the boat we all know, Sally.
Sally, right.
Right?
Yes.
And these are built mostly by the Germans, like yards like Abiking and Rasmussen. And so he's doing that, and he's totally launched his very successful Atlantic class, club racer that's all over the East Coast, and actually come out to the West Coast, and is basically going nose to nose with a PC class that the Kettenbergs designed. So that's all going on, but there's still ocean racing commissions. However, by 1928, some of the tycoons are beginning to scratch their heads and go, not sure this bull market's going to run much longer. So a guy named De Courcy Fales comes along and he goes, like, Starling, I want you to design a racing schooner for me, but can we make it a little smaller than Advance? Maybe it cost me about half as much, like maybe 59 feet instead of 88 feet overall.
And there would be less manpower too.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Right.
A little more relaxed. You can just take some friends
right.
out.
Well, absolutely. And it was sort of in the Corinthian spirit.
Right.
Like you needed a professional crew to race Advance. But with a smaller schooner, you could take your yacht club buddies out there in the Corinthian spirit, and you could have an ocean race. So he designs a boat called Nina, and she's really different looking than the hulls that have grown out of the racing fishermen and out of Advance. Because she's a little stubby compared to those. They had long, the fishing schooners in Advance have long overhangs.
Right.
And
Well, they had to look like a fishing schooner.
That's right. right. And
Right.
And I think that the fishing schooners had some of those long overhangs so that they could have a longer wetted water line when reaching back and forth to the Grand Banks. But De Courcy Fales wants a boat that's going to win a transatlantic race. It's a different game, It's not necessarily a reaching race at all,
Right.
and it's crossing the Gulf Stream, et cetera, et cetera. So Burgess comes up with a boat called Nina. So she's 58 feet overall. She's got a short counter to her, a pretty blunt bow, but she wasn't ugly. Owen Stevens made this great remark about Nina. He says the only boat that he knew that looked great from every angle. But the thing is, for 59 feet, she packed in a lot of sail. She was 70 feet overall, and she carried almost 2,300 square feet of working sail.
Right.
That's a lot on a basically small boat, right? And again, out of the blocks, like all these other Burgess schooners, she flew across the Atlantic in what was called the Queen's Cup, that went from New England to Santander, Spain. And when she got there, the King of Spain came on board, and he famously said, well sailed, Nina. And now, of course, like Nina is in a sense Burgess's Mona Lisa. And we had her around, like she was beating me back in the 1980s, right?
Right.
And that's almost 60. Well, she won the Bermuda race, and I think she's the only boat that has ever won the Bermuda race twice. And she won it once in the 1930s and once in the 1970s. maybe 60s, but nevertheless,
Right.
it's an amazing boat. Right now, I'm sure she had a pretty good handicap, but the boat could fly, and so we had her. The sad story about Nina is that she's always well cared for, but she was lost on a passage in the Southern Ocean in 2013. And the last transmission from her owner was sails blown away, proceeding under bare poles, and then gone.
Right.
And it was a heartbreak. However, she wasn't the last schooner that Burgess designed, and the last famous schooners, and that brings us to Rosa Sharon, and then
Right. So in 1928, Nina was built. In 1929, actually 1930, there must have been 3 people that ordered Ninettes.
Right. The stock market has crashed, and it's people
Right.
going like, yeah, we were like, you can see there's a trend. People are going from bigger boats to smaller boats, but the impulse for ocean racing had not
Right.
diminished. It's just like, well, can we do it for a little less? So they go to Burgess, and they're going like, we'd like a boat like Nina, but we can't quite pay that much money. And he goes like, I got one for you. And he designs what's called the Nanette. And there are 3 iterations of it. The first is Nanette. The second, I can't remember the name, but the third is our Rosa Sharon, right?
Right. So Rosa Sharon was built for Thomas J. Lamont of J.P. Morgan. He was a famous international banker. And he actually had the boat built for his son, Austin.
Right.
He was really an avid sailor. And she was pretty much built and configured for the Bermuda race.
Right, which meant that she was not a staysail schooner. It was built. She had a Marconi main, but she had a gaff foresail.
Right.
And because the Newport Bermuda race can be a real bash across the Gulf Stream, and so sometimes you don't want that giant mainsail or even a reefed mainsail up, and you need to just proceed under a foresail and a forestaysail.
Right.
But they could keep her moving, and you could get a lot of square footage and sail area just out of those 2 sails in a gale. So Thomas J. Lamont, as I understand it, was CEO of J.P.
Right.
Morgan, which would be J.P. Morgan Chase now, right?
Right.
And Austin Lamont, the actual skipper, was a physician, right? Who then
Very famous physician.
Did he become important in sort of a preservationist
of
in
Penobscot Bay.
Right.
Yeah. So he lived in Maine and sailed out of Maine.
Right. So and he obviously knew how to sail because they placed third in the Class B in their first season out in that Newport Bermuda race. Then over subsequent decades, she continued to take trophies up and down the East Coast, on the West Coast. At the age of 50, she wins her class in the Puerto Vallarta race, right?
Right.
And
she won countless races here in Southern California under the Schooner Association.
The thing for me is when I sail Rose, I always forget that she's 90 years old because the boat just loves to fly.
Right. And you think, well, we should take it easy. But if we go a little harder, we can win.
Right. My God, she's loving this.
Right.
So, well, we're lucky to have her. And
I've had this restoring boat before, and I've seen other restorations. If you take too much apart and you get too far removed from sailing and using the boat, there's a good chance the boat's going to die. So it's better to do these restorations in sections and small projects and not get involved in a total rebuild.
Right. I know that the guys up in Seattle with a big fishing schooner yacht, really, adventurous, that's what they've done, and they've been very successful with that. And they go like, well, one winter, we're going to do the planking from main chain plates aft on the starboard side. And then
Right.
the next, and then they do it in sections, and
And that's how I've had the greatest success in my business. Putting new decks on Chabasco, putting new decks on Odyssey. Okay, so we hauled her out. She's leaking at the garboards. We'll put new garboards, redo all the floors and frames in that area, and restore that section. Chabasco, we just replanked the bottom. And so we did the frames and planking in the bottom, and then she sailed in the Transpac race and won her class. So the way we're doing this is successful, and with a little financial help, we can get her done.
Well, as you know, I'm all in with my checkbook and with my elbow grease. And thanks for taking the time to talk to me about Rose and Burgess Schooners. Always a joy.
Thank you, Randy, for all the help you've given us with the Maritime Preservation Trust.
It's not over. As I used to say in World War II, U-boats, vest parts, westward. Let's get going. We got a mission in hand.
All right.
Randall Peffer is an author, a captain, a coach, and a true steward of our maritime heritage. Starling Burgess was one of the great designers of the golden days of yacht design. And like the great composers, their work needs to be kept alive so that it can be enjoyed for generations to come. The Maritime Preservation Trust is a place where these legacies and maritime antiquities can be kept and cared for all those who would want to enjoy them.